Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Just want to say to the YouTubers, thank you for watching us here on Beyond the Matrix. We're getting ready to start the show, so quiet on the set. Also, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Right there is a subscribe button, and thank you. So leave us a comment. We really appreciate that too. Okay, stand by.
Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Boy, have we got a scoop for you today. This is going to be a brain, what do you call it, a mind blower. You got to hear this. Can you imagine if this country right now could get a $1 trillion plus stimulus without it costing a thing, without one taxpayer paying a thing? And as a matter of fact, who would pay for it?
Well, not only that, but it would reduce our national debt.
Right, but tell them who would pay for it.
China.
Right? So you know what? We're going to see it. It's obvious we have somebody in office that very well might push those buttons. It is as simple as a signing of a document or a letter of request. There isn't need for lawmakers to get involved and to vote this in. This is something that's been going on since the 1915, right? Somewhere around there.
Well, it's been going on actually since Henry Kissinger got treaty signed in 1979 that allowed China to enter into our capital markets here in the United States.
Right. So we're sounding the alarm for our listeners to pay attention. Whether you're in Israel, whether you're in the United States or other countries, China is slowly and surely on an economic warfare to capture land. They don't need troops to do it. They have the almighty dollar or yen. So with that being said, what we're talking about are some very old bonds that people bought during the war that are not being paid. China has refused to pay them, and it's time to call them on their game. Introduce our guest real quick. We have about 40.
Our guest is Ms. Jana Bianco, who's the real U.S. successor to the late UK Prime Minister Thatcher. I call her the Iron Lady of America. She's a horse and cattle rancher in Middle Tennessee. She had a career with her family in rodeo events all across the American West. And she woke up one day when somebody walked in with these Republic of China bonds and said, I want to cash them.
We'll be right back after these messages. Here we go.
Great.
3.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk.
Appreciate you sticking around for the break. I'm Rod Bryant along with Jerry Gordon and our very special guest that we said was going to be here with us. Jerry, why don't you introduce our amazing guest? You guys obviously have a history together.
Oh, yes. Our history goes back nearly 15 years when I first encountered what I now call the Iron Lady of America. Channels the late Dame Margaret Thatcher. She is determined to essentially correct major imbalance in our country's indebtedness with China. And with that introduction, Jana, why don't you tell us a bit about what the American Bondholder Foundation is all about, who and what it represents?
Good morning, Saba. Thank you so much for having me on. The American Bondholders Foundation was created in August of 2001 to represent individual citizens, everyday average Americans, over 20,000 in 46 states, jointly, collectively, to hold China accountable to pay their defaulted sovereign debt owed to Americans. We have worked tirelessly in trying to hold China accountable with members of Congress, members of the administration, both in the Bush administration, throughout the Obama administration. There's been multiple resolutions out of the House and the Senate. This is a bipartisan. In fact, this is a nonpartisan issue that directly affects all of America.
And how much does the People's Republic of China owe the American bondholders, for one thing?
Well, currently, the outstanding debt, if paid in full, would be approximately 1.6 trillion with a T, trillion dollars.
So, what's the impact on the U.S. if that was redeemed somehow?
Well, basically, what we've asked the current Trump administration is to utilize these bonds to offset against the $1.1 trillion debt that China has of U.S. treasuries. You know, Americans pay their bills, they pay their taxes. Those taxes go to pay interest payments on Chinese held treasuries, as well as principal payments. There is no reason, and the law allows, at the direction of President Trump, to utilize these bonds and pay China with their own paper, reducing our debt ceiling, infusing hundreds of billions of dollars into the hands of the everyday working class American people. You know, that's why we elected Donald J. Trump, was to stand up and give a voice to those that have been forgotten, that have been walked on, roughshod, run over by the Wall Street elites and corporate America that sold us out to China long ago.
What would, for just a moment, for the listener that is not familiar with how these bonds were issued and why it's such an injustice, explain that.
Well, basically, as we all know, governments issue treasury bonds, issue debt, and people around the world buy that debt to help finance infrastructure and government overhead. And in 1912 through 1914 and so on, what was then the Republic of China issued these bonds in good faith. Christian communities, churches, military personnel bought these bonds to help support our then ally. And of course, as we know, the communist regime of what we know today as the People's Republic of China came in and took over all of China and ousted what we know and pushed Shanghai Shek into what we know today as Taiwan, and then refused to make good on these bonds. But as we know, governments issue long-term debt. So 20, 30, 40, 60-year bonds. In fact, I believe China is actually now issuing 100-year-old bonds, just like the U.S. government does. But in China's mind, if it was issued by a former government, they're not responsible. They shouldn't have to pay that, even though, as we sit here and speak, China is collecting the taxes that were used to underwrite all of these bonds. So zero good faith coming from China as usual.
Jerry?
Jana, have Americans tried to go to court here in the U.S. to get these bonds essentially redeemed? And what's
Absolutely. You're referring to Jackson versus PRC. In the late 70s, a group of bondholders filed suit against the People's Republic of China. They got judgment all the way up to the highest court level. In their attempts to collect on that judgment, the Minister of Treasury, Minister of Finance in Beijing, sent a scathing letter, a very threatening letter to the U.S. Department of State during Secretary Shultz's tenure, threatening economic hardships against companies doing business over there if the U.S. government didn't get these bondholders under control. And so Secretary Shultz summoned a gentleman by the name of Davis Robinson to file, similar to an amicus curiae brief, to have the case set aside. Not because of the merits of the case, because everybody acknowledges and admits China owes this debt, but in the interest of foreign sovereign immunity protection for China, the case was set aside in U.S. courts, unable to collect through the court system.
What's been the history in the US of other sovereign debt that's been defaulted on? And what is this peculiar entity in the Securities and Exchange Commission that has actually resolved something like over 4 dozen cases?
Well, there was an entity called the Foreign Bondholders Protective Council that was established in 1933-34. Its sole purpose was to represent the everyday average person in collecting on defaulted sovereign debt. There's been 47 previous bond settlements. Why? Because the US government told those countries, you owe a debt to our citizens and you need to pay it. And we recommend you get with the Foreign Bondholders Protective Council's good offices and resolve the issue. We recently just saw with Argentina, where they were required to pay their defaulted sovereign debt. Look, successor government doctrine has, been around for, hundreds of years. It is no different, Saba, than if bonds that the U.S. government sold, U.S. Treasury bonds that were sold during the Bush administration. Does that mean that during Obama's administration, we didn't have to honor that debt? Well, of course we do. And the same goes for under the Trump administration. Bonds that were sold during the previous regime of the Obama administration. Of course, the U.S. has to honor that debt. And China has honored this debt previously. In 1987, my idol and hero, Margaret Thatcher, told China, I'm sorry, you're not going to access our capital markets and take any more money from our people until you start paying what you currently owe. And so China paid and accepted full responsibility for any and all bonds issued pre-1949 by any other government and or territory thereof. And that's a quote from that settlement agreement of 1987. So there is precedent. China's just not been told in the U.S. they have to pay this debt.
Now, one of the things I wanted to just ask real quick is this impact of the income. What do you call it? The cashing in of those bonds not only are going to affect American citizens, but Israeli citizens and some people from all around the world. This is not just some thing for the United States, correct?
That is correct. Just as we have the American Bondholders Foundation here in the U.S. representing citizens holding this defaulted paper, in France, you have the GNDPTA, officially recognized by the French government. In fact, the French bondholder group filed a formal WTO complaint against China on these bonds. They were responsible for getting Russia to pay pre-Tsarist era debt. So defaulted sovereign debts are common practice. They are paid. Governments do pay their debts, and China needs to be held to play by the same rules as everybody else. And they need to be denied unfettered access that they currently have to U.S. capital markets, taking trillions of dollars from investors and then defaulting.
What do you think of the chance of this actually going through and having the president sign this request?
Well, look, I was very honored and blessed to meet with President Trump. We had a very, very serious conversation. He took this issue very serious. President Trump has made clear he intends to hold China accountable to play by the same rules. And he said it perfect when he said he expects reciprocity. Americans pay their bills and China needs to do the same. So we feel confident. That's why we elected Donald J. Trump, was to stand up for the everyday average Americans whose voice has been lost.
Jerry?
What is the mystery behind the U.S. government holdings of these Republic of China bonds?
We only have about a minute, and then we'll have to pick this up in the next segment. Go ahead.
I look forward to talking about that. There was a time that members of Congress, bipartisan, wrote letters to the U.S. Treasury inquiring if they held any of these defaulted sovereign bonds. The U.S. Treasury has officially come back and said, no, they do not. So time will tell.
That would be interesting to find out that we could actually put that back into the national debt.
Right.
But we don't know that right at this point.
My job is to represent the citizens that hold this paper that haven't had a voice. And so my number one priority is to get justice for the 20,000 plus American citizens that are holding this defaulted sovereign debt, and to work hand in hand with those around the globe in Israel and Belgium and France and Italy and Australia that hold this debt, and Japan. to collect on this debt.
So it's really going to require each one of these nations, from Israel to the United States and France, for the governments to actually put the pressure on China. It's not like it's not something that an individual can do, correct? The government
Correct.
yeah, yeah.
Correct.
So
We have no voice against China. I
right,
mean, we've served them notice. They just fall
they
into a
ignore it.
trash bin somewhere. They get ignored.
Right.
And typical China takes money from people and they bully them and threaten to pay it back.
Absolutely. Guys, don't go anywhere. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Wow. You know what they used to say on Howdy Doody? Cowabunga.
Cowabunga, dude.
Oh, let me see. Oh, in this next segment, you've already mentioned you've had a meeting with President Trump. And do you want to talk about who he had tagged to deal with this problem? Meaning
Certainly.
Mnuchin?
Certainly.
Okay. And do you want to talk about the
on Israel News Talk Radio.
Appreciate you sticking.
All right. There are two pieces of legislation now percolating in Congress. One is by Rand Paul, and then there's another one. One is talking about sanctions against China because of the coronavirus affair. And then there is a second one that would authorize U.S. citizens to try and sue China for compensation in that regard. And they'll go up against the stone wall of the State Department and immunity from sovereign litigation, things of that sort. And why this particular solution is the simplest one and the most powerful one that we can adopt to get repaid.
Well, while I commend and support their efforts to file for legislation to be able to file lawsuits against China, at the end of the day, if you don't have an administration and leadership willing to hold China accountable and willing to uphold those lawsuits, it's really for nothing. As we saw in the Jackson versus PRC case over these bonds. I think that the quickest avenue for recompense for the bondholders, for America, and to hold China accountable is to offset the debt that we currently have with China using ABF bondholders as bonds to do it. We don't need new legislation. We don't need new laws. We just need the current laws upheld and the will of the current administration to enforce it. We feel confident that Donald J. Trump will make that happen.
Let's put this on the show because it's really good. Also, I know that you briefly mentioned the reason why we haven't seen any action from our government in the past. Maybe massage that a little bit. Like you said, it's bipartisan. The fact that people have decided they'd rather keep things at what they call normality and not push the button, not anger China. For some reason, we've just not done it. I'd be curious to talk about it for a bit. Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk.
We know that you're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio, reminding you you can watch the show live on YouTube when we are broadcasting. So go to NETIV, NETIV, online, one word, NETIV online, and you'll see a channel there that says Beyond the Matrix. We really appreciate you watching. Also leave comments. We like the comments that you're putting down and the curiosity. Before we went to the break, Jerry, you had asked a question. Why don't we refresh it and drive on?
Well, the question is fairly straightforward. Jono, why is it we have legislation pending in the Congress talking about imposing sanctions and also suing China under some form of sovereign jurisprudence to recover compensation from folks versus essentially what we're talking about, which is a giant debt swap. Why don't you cover that?
Well, while I commend members of Congress, both House and Senate, for filing legislation in good faith to try to make a difference, as we know, China is currently protected under foreign sovereign immunity protection in the courts as a result of the Jackson versus PRC case in the late 70s. However, you can have judgments all day long, just as they did in the Jackson versus PRC case against China or a sovereign government. But if you do not have an administration willing to stand up and enforce that judgment, well, then it's all for nothing. And that's kind of what I see taking place, that has always taken place in the past. However, I do believe that there will be a significant difference under Donald J. Trump, because he's made it clear he does intend to hold China accountable.
So who in the administration is the point person essentially for getting this done?
Well, obviously the president, everybody serves under his leadership. We were very, very blessed following our meeting with President Trump. He personally reached out to Secretary Mnuchin and asked him to meet with us to brief him on this issue, the importance of this issue, and the difference that this issue will make across America. At the time, Secretary Mnuchin, of course, was in the middle of what we now know as the Phase 1 China trade deal, and had 150 things on his plate. Unfortunately, we were not one of them at the time, but things have changed. And we can do this debt offset without having to have new legislation passed in the Congress and supported, because the laws are already there to do this. It's a matter of the president saying enough's enough. China, we're holding you accountable to play by the very same rules that we as Americans play by in the rest of the world, and giving those directives to uphold this debt and doing a debt swap.
Besides the example of the UK selective default negotiations with the PRC, can you give any other examples of successful governments paying off prior regime debt?
Absolutely. I mean, Germany's still been paying on the Weimar debt. We have the French bondholder group that I referenced previously was responsible for getting Russia to pay pre-Tsarist ever debt. I mean, Britain just, I believe, last year sent a payment on loans they made from the U.S. during World War II. So successor governments do pay their debts. And we expect China to do the same. But they will not unless told to and forced to, as we saw in the 1987 China BRIC Treaty under Margaret Thatcher.
Well, I really see that the dangling the carrot of debt swap would be a very good one to go with. Wouldn't you think?
I do believe so. It should be done. I can assure you that if the roles were reversed and this was a debt that the U.S. owed China, China would have already stepped in, taken airports, railways, ports, infrastructure, just as we've seen around the world, especially in your African region, in Sri Lanka and all these other places. And we see the move that they're trying to make in Israel, which is very frightening, as they've infiltrated in and they dangle their money. They're corrupt. They pay corrupt politicians, and it falls on the backs of the everyday person in those countries. That's right. And it's a very serious national security issue. Currently, China has unfettered access themselves, along with all of their state-owned enterprises, on U.S. capital markets. There's no disclosure. There's nothing.
Right. Think about the farmlands, the infrastructure, the properties that are owned by China. I really do believe that if most people knew how much they were invested in other countries, it would probably scare them to death.
I have no doubt. It scares me to death every day just knowing what they have here in the United States of America and some of our most important infrastructure that they own and control. Just like when they purchased Smithville, the largest pork producer in our country. That is part of our food supply chain. And we now have a foreign government who has made it clear their intentions against the United States and the rest of the world. And that's very frightening to know that it's under the control of the Communist Chinese Party.
And think about this, the ports that they own, not only just in our country, but in Israel, they were talking about selling Haifa port, or having them manage it, which I'm not sure they're still doing that. Jerry, do you know?
I think the answer is that was one of the reasons why, for example, Secretary of State Pompeo took a time out of his
Right.
to fly to Israel to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu just before the formation of the new government, and expressed concerns about not only the contract for the management of the port of Haifa, but also the award potentially to Hutchinson Water Company of Hong Kong, essentially for the largest desalination project that Israel has undertaken in that regard. And then on top of that, you've got significant Chinese minority investment in Israeli high tech. And so, therefore, it creates a national security issue for not only Israel proper, but it also threatens essentially the special alliance between Israel and the U.S. So, Jono, switching back to the U.S., how nonpartisan is this issue? Why don't you give us an illustration of that?
We have been very, very fortunate since our creation. This issue has been very, very bipartisanly supported out of the House, out of the Senate. There's been multiple resolutions issued. I have testified before Congress on 2 occasions. The World Bank, IMF, held special luncheons and conferences on this issue in support of China being held accountable, in support of doing debt offset structures around the world. The World Bank tried their best to get members and countries in Africa to purchase this debt from us discounted and use it at full value to extinguish debt they owed to China, to prevent from losing the infrastructure, the ports, the railroads and properties that we have seen over the years be lost. People are afraid. People were afraid of China. Wall Street, corporate America is afraid of China. They're fearful, should they support this issue or anything anti-China, their factories will be burned to the ground. We've already seen the $5 trillion of intellectual property theft from China. So the list of the parade of horribles is unbelievable. And so it's better to turn a blind eye in hopes that over time China changes, which we have seen will not. And their intentions very clear. And so we have seen over time that corporate America, Wall Street, are now realizing that getting in bed with the Chinese was not necessarily in their best interest, or America's for that matter.
What would be the maybe an example? I realize you're not a prophet, so what would be the impact of our international economies if this was paid back, and people in the United States, I guess, in the U.S. economy as well?
Well, you're talking of trillions of dollars that China owes in defaulted sovereign debt around the globe, not just here in America. But if this was done via a debt offset, you're talking about infusing billions and billions of dollars into the U.S. economy, as well as reducing our national debt. And I think it's very significant, the difference it's going to make in the lives of Americans, as well as those around the globe, to hold China accountable and push back against their tyranny.
It would be a shot in the arm after going through this COVID pandemic that we've had and seeing the economy just barrel downward. This would be an amazing boom. Now, who knows how long it's going to take to get China to put that money back in the coffers or trade the debt. But if it could be done quicker, it would be so much better. Do you have
There's
anything
no
else?
reason it can't be done. Just to add to what the American Bondholders Foundation represents. In the very beginning, which will be 19 years this August for American Bondholders Foundation, the bondholders decided they wanted to help make a difference in America. They knew this was going to be a heavy lift. They knew this was going to be like a David and Goliath story, which it truly has been. However, they wanted to help make a difference for all of America. So under contract, they attributed 20% of every penny collected goes to an already approved 501c3 nonprofit called ABF Charities. Its purpose is coming out of the gate is to provide members of our first line of defense. For example, volunteer firefighters in America. There are over 1 million. These are people who put their life on the line, not because they get paid, but because they're patriots and they care. They don't even have proper turnout gear, breathing apparatus. And these funds will go to provide that across this country. That's one example of many that will make a difference in America.
When we come back after the break, I would like to talk to you about what can the average citizen do that they don't hold the bonds, but what can they do to help propagate this and get this information out. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, guys.
So
one more segment.
John, have we missed anything?
I don't think so. Other than telling people it's important that they reach out to their representative to support the American Bondholders Foundation, and to tell China, play by the same rules as the rest of the world, as Americans.
We ask you a personal question. How a gal who's living on a ranch, essentially in Middle Tennessee, have the gumption to go forward on a fairly complex international issue? What's the history behind you and the ABF?
I received a few of these bonds from a friend while I was trying to get venture capital for another business. And in sending them through forensics at the U.S. Treasury to see if they were legitimate or real, the U.S. Treasury came back to me and said, yes, they're real. They're legit. I said, wonderful. Where do I take them to collect? Well, the problem is China doesn't want to pay.
Right.
And I said, I don't understand. What do you mean China doesn't want to pay? You're telling me this is sovereign debt. This is no different than a U.S. Treasury bond. And they said, yeah, but it's complicated. China doesn't want to pay it. And I was furious over it. Everything I pick up says made in China. Mm-hmm. I saw middle-class America just be destroyed. The blue-collar worker. I saw corporate America and Wall Street selling us out to the Chinese. And I thought to myself, I didn't care if I was the only holder of these bonds. Justice must prevail. Our country was founded on rules and law and justice. And I was going to fight to the end to make certain that either A, the U.S. government's either going to have to come out and say, China, we're going to forgive you for all the debt that you owe. I mean, this started during Kissinger when he sold out the American people during the 79 foreign claims settlement. So I decided then they were going to pay come hell or high water. And having no idea the thousands of people that hold these bonds, not only here in America, but around the world. And it broke in USA Today. And every morning thereafter, I would go to the end of my little dirt and gravel driveway where I have gates to keep livestock from getting out, because I truly do raise horses and cattle. There was packages from all around the world and all across the U.S. with letters and their bonds saying, please, will you represent me? My grandfather served in the war, and these were promoted to our military people to buy and help support our then ally.
So families have really been holding on to these, thinking
these are legacy holdings.
Right. Hold on. Let's put this on. Here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk.
This is Beyond the Matrix. I'm Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon and our amazing guest. She is a powerhouse of information about China's debt that they were supposed to be paid and should have paid for, old debt, and what we're finding out, legacy debt. And we'll explain in just a moment. Why don't we pick that up, Jerry, where we were in the break, so we can bring the radio audience up to where we're at.
Basically, John, I would like to start at the beginning. How did you ever, as a gal living in Middle Tennessee, raising horses and cattle, get involved with an international financial debacle?
To be honest, I was actually seeking venture capital for another project, a seatbelt invention. And a couple of friends, older gentlemen, gave me a couple of these bonds. I had no idea what they were. I sent them to forensics at the request of my attorney to the U.S. Treasury. And in Treasury Department coming back and informing us, yes, they're legit, they're real, they're credible, they're authentic. I'm like, great. Where do I go to collect it? And they said, I said, you're telling me this is no different than a U.S. Treasury bond? And they said, well, China doesn't want to pay. I said, I don't understand. What do you mean? This is a government sovereign bond. Well, it's complicated. China doesn't want to pay. I was infuriated by that because there was nowhere to go. I couldn't go to a bank. I couldn't go to a Wall Street firm. I couldn't go anywhere to collect this debt that China owed. At the time, I had no idea how many people, not only in America, but around the world, were holding this paper. And I began to research it and work on it. And it became my life's mission that China was going to play by the same rules and be held accountable. Our country was founded on justice and law and fairness. And China was going to play by the same rules if they were going to continue to do business in America, as far as I was concerned. And almost overnight, as you said, I live on a farm and I have an old dirt gravel driveway. And at the end, I've got gates. So my livestock, if they get out, don't get out on the road. And every day I woke up to packages from around the world with bonds and letters from people saying, please, will you represent me? My grandfather passed these down to 36 grandchildren because he bought them because he was in the war. He was in our military, and they were promoted to our military personnel to help support our then ally in the wars. And churches, I've had churches contact me that the churches got with their people in the church and purchase these bonds. And so these are bonds that's been passed down to children, to grandchildren, to in hopes that someday they would get justice and their investment would be returned.
When you think of $1.6 trillion, it's hard to even imagine. I know that when we listen to Congress talk, they throw $1 trillion around like we would throw $100 bill around, right? It's just another trillion. What's another trillion? But what you're saying, this would be a genuine boon for our economy, with people getting money back into their families that they've wished for and hoped for, but it was like having counterfeit money in their bank.
That is correct. Look, at the end of the day, we have the master negotiator sitting in the White House. And I am very confident that he will look out after the best interest of the American people. He will negotiate a resolve. My job is to give him as much flexibility and leverage to hold China accountable as possible. And that's my goal and objective. And we feel confident that master negotiator will do right by the American people and the bondholders.
What do you say to the person who is listening? They don't know if they have stock in the family like that or not, but it's immaterial at this point. First, let's talk to the person that all of a sudden they realize, I have this stock available or these bonds available. What can they do to get their voice heard? Is there a registry?
Currently, the bonds that the ABF represents, we have physical custody of those bonds. And we haven't taken bonds in for years and years and years. However, they can contact our parent company, Azucena Enterprises, and get representation should they want to get those bonds collected. And that stands for anybody around the world that has these bonds. And that's Azucena, AZUCENA Enterprises.com. We have a website with the instructions. We plan to be a voice for everybody who's gone forgotten and didn't get that representation.
What can the average person do to help promote this? What can we do to fan the flames?
Well, the American people need to pick up their phone and they need to call their congressman, their senator, and say, hold China accountable and stop playing around and quit dragging things on and on and on. We see so much of that. And after 20 years with the American Bondholders Foundation, it's time for justice to prevail. It's time that members of Congress tell the president, we support you in holding China accountable and playing by the very same rules. And that's what the American people need to do. Or they can call the White House and say, Mr. President, we support you holding China accountable. It's bad enough that they are have stolen so much of our intellectual
Mhm.
property. I mean, my gosh, they're now trying to steal vaccine information,
Right.
as we have seen. The CCP are liars, they are cheats, they are thieves. And it's time that they be called to the table. It's time that they be held accountable. And so the American people can voice that to the president, to the White House, and to their members of Congress.
Right.
Enough's enough.
This is actually a really good time for us to bring this up because of COVID. There is a lot of individuals that are having to rethink their own personal opinions about how we have become so, what's the word? We need to wean ourselves off of China. And there are individuals out there that are realizing, you know what, we've been spoiled by this and we need the business back in our country. We need factories. We need all production back in our country that we haven't had for years, all because China was willing to step up and do it. We just let it go. And I think now we're all taking a double take. How can an individual get a hold of you personally, or are you available to chat with someone?
Certainly am. I try to make myself available to everyone. This is a very, very important American issue. We have a website, AmericanBondholdersFoundation.com. You can, all of our contact information is at that website. We have Twitter at ABFUSA, and we also have Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook. So we welcome all the support we can get. It's time for America to take a stand, and it's time for America to take America back.
Absolutely.
And bring our pharmaceuticals back to be manufactured in America, and stop the CCP from terrorizing the world as we have seen.
Absolutely. Very, very, very good. Jerry, do you have a couple of final questions? We have about 3 minutes left.
One of the issues that you addressed earlier, in fact, I think Rod brought it up, was that perhaps unbeknownst to the general public, China has acquired vast acreage in the Permian Basin for production of oil. And I point to a report this past weekend that showed that it was a fleet of 107 very large cargo carriers, big tankers, with cheap oil being shipped across to China at this juncture. What do we do in that case? Is this the punishment that the free market has for us in the context of retaining our national provenance? I'd like you to address that.
Well, it goes to what I previously said for so many years, which goes back to the 1979 Foreign Claims Settlement Commission under Kissinger, when he basically sold out the bondholders, opened normal trade relations. We saw China move into the WTO to be the superpower that they are today, all for the benefit of Wall Street, corporate America, who wanted access to that 1.3 billion populace to do business in China, that we have seen the devastation from. And the American people so busy keeping up with the Joneses that they weren't keeping the eyes on what was really going on in their country, that we have been taken over from within by the Chinese Communist Party. It's going to be difficult to start turning that back, but if we don't, we might as well all start speaking Chinese. But I think the American people have awakened. I think that's why we elected Donald J. Trump, was to stand up for America, to make America first, and to start pushing back on the Chinese Communist Party and what they're doing to our country.
We have, because of the growth of capitalism around the world, even in communist countries, they've been testing it and playing with the idea. There is now a full court press of economic warfare that most people have ignored. And China has been on the forefront of that for years. I mean, been on the forefront. I can remember stories of them coming in, and even some of the Russian scientists would come in and tour, Redstone Arsenal or NASA, and they would pick up on their shoes the metal, and they would go analyze and find out what was in the properties. I mean, they have been doing this for, I don't know, for at least decades.
Absolutely.
And it's time that we call it.
Yes, China has infiltrated every phase of our government, city, county, state, and federal. And it's time we start pushing back. I mean, look at all their students that come here and go to our colleges. Their job is to get information and report back to the CCP. enough is enough. We better fight to take our country back.
Absolutely.
And now is the time.
Absolutely. We had mentioned the fact that they own billions of dollars worth of infrastructure in this country. If they wanted to and had the desire to do it, they could put a serious crunch on our country. And I don't think people realize that.
They already have by withholding all of our pharmaceutical supplies, 95%.
Think about
even our Tylenols, our diabetes medicine, our heart medicine, our high blood pressure medicine, all comes from China. Enough's enough. It needs to be brought back to the U.S.
Well, this has been a fantastic interview. We really appreciate you coming on the show. Guys, until next week, we'll see you. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom. Thanks.
Thank you, Saba.
So let me ask you before you go.
Yes, sir.
If you have horses and cattle, does that make you a cowgirl now? Like we're Texan.
I've always been a cowgirl. I grew up in rodeo. Doing team roping and barrel racing.
Oh, really?
And, absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Absolutely.
Have you always lived in Tennessee?
I was actually born in Arkansas, but I was just a few months old, raised in Tennessee until my late teens. And my father's work took us out west for 20 years in Arizona and Nevada. And when he retired, I have 3 sisters. There's 4 of us. And we all are in this very same line of work, and we work together every day, and we farm together every day.
That's incredible.
He said, when I retire, I'm going back to God's country, which is what he calls Tennessee. That's what we call it, God's country.
All of my folks are originally from West Virginia. So
well, there you go.
Yeah.
So we came back and went right back to doing what we did before.
Oh, that's fantastic. We have one of the members of our community. She's a cattle rancher. And to look at her, like looking at you, you would think this woman, is, you couldn't picture them being a rough hand cattle rancher, but she puts her chaps on. She's out there. She works with her workers, and it's amazing.
Oh, the guys are always teasing me, boss, why don't you put on your Carhartts when you do your interviews? Because when I get off the phone, today's a big day for us, actually, because it's, we do sell beef, and I raise Angus Hereford Cross, all organic beef. And so we have had the last 2 weeks have been thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of beef going in and being processed and then delivered out. So
let me ask you, is this whole logistics issue with beef and the COVID, what's, and I guess it's the butchering manufacturing, has that really been a serious thing with you?
It hasn't affected us because we don't use the big packing houses. It is a leverage. I mean, first of all, the majority of the packing houses in the U.S. are owned by Brazil. Here we go, foreign involvement, right? And just like with China and Smithville. And so it's not the farmer. We're the always one that takes the hit. Prices of beef are skyrocketing in the stores. It's not that that's coming down to us in our pocket by far. If anything, our market is way down.
I wonder what's the deal?
It is a control factor. It's everything is based on volume. And so their equipment, their machines are all set, for example, in the pork industry. Everything goes through at 250 pounds. So all the machines, the packaging, the equipment is set for that 250 pounds coming through. And they would have to reconfigure, I call it the big L for lazy, and not giving a damn about the American people and the people this truly affects. But which is what we see in Wall Street and corporate America and the elite. They don't care about nobody but themselves, right? And that almighty dollar, because it's literally a matter of them changing the configurations for now 300 pounders coming through versus 250 pounders. That's all it is.
And you guys can't put the pressure on them too.
Well, we're doing our best. We're doing our best.
Well, I tell you, I envy you. I live in Houston. That's busy. There's nothing beautiful about the city of Houston. The people are great, but I absolutely miss, like when I drive out to Central Texas and the Hill Country and see the Capitol.
The hills of West Virginia.
I miss it so badly. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? If it wasn't for the fact that all my kids are going to eventually be back here when they retire, I would have been gone. I mean, you just miss it. I remember driving through Kentucky, the bluegrass region with beautiful white fences and horses. Oh my goodness.
That's what we have here.
Incredible.
So I run several hundred acres of beautiful pastures and Angus cattle and Angus Hereford Cross, and then of course we have the quarter horses, separate from
Right.
that.
Right.
But it's lush and green and
Ah,
beautiful. This is my favorite time of the year. I've got baby calves laying and running and playing everywhere, so
air
it's
smells so
wonderful.
nice.
Yes, when you
Yeah.
can hear the crickets and the bullfrogs at
Oh
night.
my goodness. Yes. And
Absolutely,
where you can still smell the rain before it gets there.
absolutely.
I was telling somebody about that the other day, and they're like, "No, that's not real."
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
it
it
is.
is.
It is.
You
Yeah.
can smell it coming. You can
Right.
smell it, and you can feel it in the air before the drops even start falling.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you, and hopefully, when things start working a little bit better, if you want to come back and let's do another segment, let's do it.
Oh, thank you so very
Okay.
much. This has truly been an honor for me. Saba, God bless you, and thank you for the kind words. You do know that Margaret Thatcher is my absolute hero.
My
So,
hero too. Yeah.
yeah.
So that
All
makes
right.
you our hero.
Yes, that's right. You're
Thank you.
you're
Thank
doing
you. I'm very,
this.
very humbled, very touched.
You're doing a lot of work. I know that it's going to benefit you in some way, but you realize there were a lot of people that was holding these bonds that never stepped up and has done what you've done. So, wish you the best.
Thank you. A lot of people have made comment to that, and it's like it's not about me. It's about the people that have placed their faith and trust in me, ABF, to get justice for them and the difference it's going to make in their lives and the lives of the American people.
Right.
Because look, when they get money in their communities, they're going to share it. It's all about paying it forward, and it's all about making a difference in your community. This is very, very important.
Well,
The
we really
last
appreciate
word I have
it.
for you is that this is economic stimulus. It doesn't cost
Oh,
the taxpayer a nickel.
100%.
That doesn't cost the taxpayer money. Amen to that.
I
You're
wish
absolutely
I
right.
wish we'd have said that
It's okay.
because
In
that's
your
true.
follow on, you guys can bring that up.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Well,
We will do that. Well, be well
Thanks,
to you
Donna.
and to our YouTube followers. We want to say thank you for watching us on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Take time to subscribe. It's right there, and we really appreciate you coming and joining us each week.
Thank
And
you.
until then, everyone say shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.